Have you ever loved someone who made you feel wanted one day and completely invisible the next? Someone who looked calm on the outside, but somehow made you question everything inside yourself? Someone who never truly chased you, never fully opened up, yet somehow never fully let you go either? That kind of connection can feel emotionally addictive because the human mind is wired to chase uncertainty. Psychology calls it intermittent reinforcement. When affection becomes unpredictable, the brain starts craving it even more. And that is why loving a dismissive avoidant can feel like drowning in confusion while still hoping for air from the same person pulling away from you. You start overthinking every message, every silence, every small sign of attention. One moment, they seem deeply connected to you. The next, they disappear emotionally like a wall suddenly went up between both of you. And the hardest part is this: they rarely explain why. So you begin asking painful questions. Did I do something wrong? Do they even care about me? Was any of it real? But here is what most people do not understand about avoidance. Sometimes the absence of expression is not the absence of feeling. Sometimes the people who struggle the most to show love are fighting battles inside themselves you cannot see. And by the end of this video, you will understand something that changes the way you see avoidance forever. You will learn the hidden emotional patterns that reveal when an avoidant truly cares, even when their actions seem cold, distant, or confusing. Because once you understand the psychology behind their behavior, their silence starts speaking louder than their words ever could. The truth is, dismissive avoidants are often misunderstood by almost everyone around them. People call them heartless, emotionally unavailable, toxic, uncaring. But human psychology is rarely that simple. Most avoidants did not wake up one day and decide to fear closeness. That fear was built slowly, quietly, over years of emotional conditioning. Many of them learned very early in life that vulnerability was unsafe, that depending on people leads to disappointment, that expressing emotions makes you weak. So instead of learning how to connect deeply, they learned how to survive independently. And survival can look very cold from the outside. That is why dismissive avoidants often become masters at emotional suppression. They hide what they feel so deeply that even they struggle to understand their own emotions sometimes. They convince themselves they do not need anyone. They prioritize space over closeness, logic over vulnerability, distance over emotional exposure. But here's the part nobody talks about. Avoidants still feel attachment. They still feel loss. They still feel fear. They still care. They just express it differently. And if you do not understand their emotional language, you will completely miss the signs. Because avoidants rarely love in loud ways. Their care is often hidden behind hesitation, delayed responses, quiet observation, indirect actions, emotional inconsistency. They may never say exactly what you want to hear. They may never give love in the perfect way. But deep down, many avoidants are carrying emotional conflicts they do not know how to resolve. Part of them wants connection. Another part fears losing themselves inside it. And this inner battle creates the confusing push and pull dynamic so many people experience with avoidance. One moment they move closer. The next they emotionally retreat. One moment they open up slightly. The next they shut down completely. And if you are emotionally attached to them, this cycle can slowly destroy your peace of mind. Because human beings naturally seek emotional certainty. We want reassurance, stability, clarity, but avoidants often struggle to provide those things consistently, even when they genuinely care. That is why being involved with an avoidant can trigger deep emotional anxiety inside people, especially those who already fear abandonment. The brain starts obsessing over tiny signs, tiny changes, tiny moments of warmth, because when love feels uncertain, the nervous system stays alert all the time. And eventually, you stop listening to your intuition and start chasing emotional crumbs. But understanding avoidance is not about excusing unhealthy behavior. It is about understanding the psychology underneath it. Because once you understand what drives someone emotionally, you stop taking every action personally. You begin seeing the fear beneath the distance, the pain beneath the silence, the protection beneath the withdrawal, and suddenly things start making more sense. You realize that some people did not grow up learning how to feel emotionally safe with others. They learned how to survive alone. They learned how to disconnect before someone could hurt them first. They built emotional walls so high that even when love finally arrives, they struggle to let it in. That does not mean every avoidant relationship is healthy, and it does not mean you should ignore your own emotional needs. But it does mean this: if you keep expecting avoidants to love exactly like emotionally expressive people, you will continue misunderstanding them, because avoidants often communicate care in ways that are subtle, quiet, hidden beneath behavior most people misread. And in this video, you are going to learn the 5 powerful signs that reveal when an avoidant truly cares about you, signs most people completely overlook, signs rooted deeply in human psychology and emotional defense mechanisms. Because sometimes the people who act the most emotionally distant are the same people silently terrified of attachment, rejection, and vulnerability. And once you recognize those patterns, you stop seeing only the distance. You start seeing the wounded human being hiding behind it. What makes this dynamic so emotionally exhausting is that most people try to understand avoidance using normal emotional logic. But avoidants do not operate from emotional comfort. They operate from emotional defense. And there is a massive difference between those two things. A person who feels emotionally safe usually moves closer when they care. They seek reassurance. They express affection naturally. Connection feels calming to them. But for a dismissive avoidant, emotional closeness can activate internal stress instead of peace. The deeper the bond becomes, the stronger their protective instincts start rising inside them. This is why avoidants often confuse people who genuinely love them. They can enjoy your presence deeply while still needing distance afterward. They can miss you while ignoring your messages. They can think about you constantly while pretending they are completely unaffected. And to someone who does not understand attachment psychology, these contradictions feel cruel. But internally, avoidants are often dealing with emotional overload they were never taught how to manage properly. Many of them spent years training themselves not to rely on anyone emotionally. Independence became their identity. Self-control became their survival strategy. They learned how to suppress emotional needs before those needs could make them vulnerable. Over time, this created a nervous system that automatically treats emotional dependence like a threat. That is why closeness can trigger withdrawal. Not because the feelings are fake, but because the feelings are becoming too real. And this is where many people misunderstand avoidance completely. They think distance always means lack of care. Sometimes it does, but sometimes distance is simply the avoidant nervous system trying to regain control after feeling emotionally exposed. Human psychology works in powerful ways. The brain always tries to protect us from experiences connected to pain. If someone grew up in an environment where emotional intimacy led to criticism, rejection, pressure, or disappointment, their subconscious mind starts associating closeness with danger. Even healthy love can feel overwhelming to them later in life. So instead of leaning into emotional connection, they instinctively pull away from it. Not because they want to hurt people, because deep attachment activates fear they cannot easily explain. And the painful part is that many avoidants do not fully understand themselves either. They may believe they simply need space or do not like emotional pressure, without realizing that unresolved emotional conditioning is controlling their reactions underneath the surface. This creates a silent internal war. Part of them wants intimacy. Another part fears losing emotional freedom. Part of them wants to trust. Another part expects disappointment eventually. And when these opposing forces collide, their behavior becomes inconsistent. One day they seem emotionally available, another day they feel unreachable. One moment they share something personal, the next moment they become detached again. People watching from the outside often assume avoidants are emotionally careless, but many avoidants are actually hyper-aware emotionally. They notice more than they admit. They analyze interactions deeply. They observe changes in energy, tone, and behavior carefully. The difference is that they process emotions privately instead of expressing them openly. Silence becomes their coping mechanism. Withdrawal becomes their emotional reset button. Distance becomes the place where they feel psychologically safe again. And this can create heartbreaking misunderstandings in relationships. Because while one person sees emotional retreat as rejection, the avoidant may see it as self-preservation. The problem is not always the absence of emotion. The problem is the inability to regulate emotional vulnerability in a healthy way. That is why avoidants often struggle during emotionally intense moments. Arguments, serious conversations, emotional expectations, and deep vulnerability can overwhelm their nervous system quickly. Instead of moving toward resolution, they shut down internally. Some become emotionally numb, some disappear temporarily, some act cold even when they care deeply inside. And unfortunately, this behavior can unintentionally wound the people closest to them, because love without clarity creates emotional suffering. The human heart needs emotional security to feel calm. Without it, anxiety grows, doubt grows, fear grows. People begin questioning their worth. They start chasing reassurance instead of feeling naturally valued. This is why relationships with avoidance can become emotionally addictive. The inconsistency creates psychological attachment loops inside the brain. Moments of affection feel incredibly powerful because they are unpredictable. The mind starts craving emotional validation from the very person creating uncertainty, and many people lose themselves trying to decode someone who struggles to decode themselves. But there is another side to this truth that deserves attention. Avoidants are not emotionless machines. They are human beings carrying emotional armor, and armor only exists where wounds once existed. Most dismissive avoidants built emotional walls long before you entered their life. Those walls were not created overnight. They were built through disappointment, emotional neglect, betrayal, invalidation, or experiences that taught them vulnerability was unsafe. So they adapted by becoming emotionally self-reliant. The problem is that survival strategies protecting someone in childhood can damage intimacy in adulthood. A child who learns "I cannot depend on others" may grow into an adult who struggles to receive love fully even when genuine connection appears. The nervous system becomes conditioned for emotional independence, not emotional closeness. And yet, despite all of this, avoidants still form attachments. They still care deeply about certain people. They still fear losing connections that matter to them. They simply express attachment differently than emotionally expressive individuals do. This is why understanding their patterns matters so much. Once you recognize the hidden psychology behind their behavior, you stop interpreting every action through only your own emotional lens. You begin noticing the quiet signs beneath the surface, the hesitation that hides fear, the withdrawal that hides overwhelm, the emotional restraint that hides vulnerability. And suddenly, what once looked like complete indifference starts revealing something far more complicated. Because sometimes the people who struggle the hardest to show affection are the same people fighting the strongest internal battle against emotional exposure. And this is exactly why so many people fail to recognize when an avoidant genuinely values them. They keep searching for dramatic displays of affection while missing the quiet behaviors that actually reveal emotional investment. Avoidants rarely communicate feelings in obvious ways. Their emotions leak through patterns, reactions, and small actions that most people ignore because they are expecting something louder. One of the strongest signs an avoidant cares is not perfection. It is persistence. Even after creating distance, they somehow return again. This confuses many people because emotionally healthy communication would look far more direct, but avoidants often retreat whenever emotions become too intense internally. The connection starts feeling vulnerable. Their mind begins craving space to calm itself. So they pull back. They become quieter, slower, harder to reach, yet despite all of that, they circle back. And psychologically, this matters more than most people realize. Someone who feels completely detached usually leaves emotionally and mentally. They disconnect without inner conflict. But avoidants often leave physically while remaining emotionally attached internally. Their silence is not always emotional absence. Many times, it is emotional overload mixed with fear. This does not mean every disappearing act should be tolerated. Emotional inconsistency can still create deep pain. But when an avoidant repeatedly reconnects, checks on you indirectly, or reappears after emotional withdrawal, it often reveals unresolved attachment beneath the surface. Because people do not repeatedly return to what means nothing to them emotionally. Another hidden sign appears in the details they remember about you. Avoidants may seem emotionally distant externally, but many are extremely observant internally. They pay attention quietly. They notice patterns in your personality. They remember conversations you thought they ignored. Small preferences stay in their mind longer than you expect. And this happens because avoidants often express emotional connection mentally before they express it verbally. A highly expressive person may shower someone with words. An avoidant may stay silent while mentally studying every detail about the person they care about. Their attachment forms through observation, consistency, and familiarity. They may never openly admit how much they notice, but their memory reveals emotional significance. This surprises many people because avoidants are often seen as detached individuals who do not care deeply, but emotional restraint does not erase emotional awareness. In fact, some avoidants become deeply attached internally while appearing calm on the outside. That inner contradiction is exhausting for them too, because the more someone matters to them emotionally, the more vulnerable they feel psychologically, and vulnerability is exactly what their nervous system tries hardest to control. Another powerful sign appears when they slowly begin sharing access to their private life. For dismissive avoidants, personal space is deeply connected to emotional safety. Their routines, independence, and alone time become protective zones where they feel stable and emotionally regulated. So when an avoidant starts allowing someone into those spaces consistently, it often signals growing trust. This may look small to other people. Maybe they start texting more naturally. Maybe they include you in daily habits. Maybe they open up slightly about personal stress. Maybe they invite you into parts of their world they usually protect from everyone else. To emotionally expressive individuals, these behaviors may seem basic. But for someone wired to protect emotional independence at all costs, these moments can feel psychologically huge, because avoidants do not easily surrender emotional access. They guard it carefully. That is why patience becomes so important when dealing with emotionally guarded people. Real progress with avoidance usually happens slowly, quietly, in layers. Trust is rarely built through pressure. Pressure often activates more shutdown behavior. But emotional safety can gradually soften defensive patterns over time. Another major sign is practical support. Many avoidants struggle with emotional conversations, but they often show care through actions instead. They may help solve problems, offer assistance quietly, show up during difficult moments without using emotional language. Their affection often becomes functional rather than verbally expressive, and this confuses people who associate love only with emotional reassurance. But psychology shows that people express attachment differently based on their emotional conditioning. Someone uncomfortable with vulnerable communication may still demonstrate deep loyalty through reliability, effort, or acts of service. An avoidant may never deliver perfect emotional speeches, but they may drive across the city to help you. They may quietly support you during stressful periods. They may handle practical burdens without needing recognition, because actions feel safer to them than emotional exposure. Doing feels less dangerous than confessing, and sometimes hidden care exists inside behaviors people overlook because they are too focused on what was never said aloud. Another revealing pattern appears when an avoidant senses they may lose someone important emotionally. This is where their internal attachment becomes easier to notice. Although they try hard to appear emotionally controlled, real separation can activate powerful fear underneath that calm exterior. Suddenly, their behavior changes. They become more attentive, more reactive, more emotionally affected than usual. Sometimes jealousy appears unexpectedly. Sometimes they reach out after long silence. Sometimes they struggle watching someone emotionally move on, because underneath emotional suppression, attachment still exists, and losing connection can force emotions to surface that they spent years trying to manage quietly. This is what makes avoidance so psychologically complex. Their external behavior often contradicts their internal emotional world. They may look distant while caring deeply. They may act unaffected while internally battling anxiety, attachment, and fear of vulnerability at the same time. And unfortunately, many avoidants only fully realize the depth of their emotions when the possibility of permanent loss becomes real. That is why understanding these patterns matters deeply, not to romanticize emotional unavailability, not to excuse unhealthy treatment, but to recognize that human beings are often carrying emotional histories invisible to everyone around them. Some people learned how to express love openly. Others learned how to hide it to survive. And sometimes the quietest forms of care come from people who spent their entire lives afraid of emotional exposure. The hardest truth to accept is that understanding an avoidant does not automatically remove the pain of loving one. Awareness can explain behavior, but explanation alone does not heal emotional exhaustion. And many people lose themselves because they become so focused on decoding another person that they stop listening to what their own heart has been trying to say for a very long time. Because deep down, every human being wants the same emotional experience: to feel chosen, to feel emotionally secure, to feel safe enough to stop questioning where they stand. And when those needs remain unmet for too long, the mind slowly enters survival mode. People begin accepting emotional confusion as normal. They start celebrating tiny moments of affection while ignoring the emotional instability surrounding them. The nervous system becomes addicted to relief instead of peace. That is why emotional inconsistency can feel so powerful psychologically. When affection appears after distance, the brain experiences temporary emotional reward. Dopamine rises, hope returns, anxiety softens for a moment, but eventually the cycle repeats again. Closeness appears, distance follows. And over time, this pattern can drain someone emotionally without them realizing how deeply it is affecting their mental state. This is why emotional maturity matters so much in relationships involving avoidant behavior. Compassion is important. Understanding is important. Patience is important. But abandoning your own emotional well-being in the process is not love. It is self-neglect disguised as loyalty. A healthy connection should not constantly force you to question your value. It should not leave you emotionally starving for basic reassurance. It should not make you feel invisible every time someone becomes emotionally uncomfortable. And this is where many people struggle internally. They confuse understanding trauma with accepting unhealthy patterns forever. But emotional wounds explain behavior. They do not automatically justify repeated emotional harm. Someone can have painful emotional conditioning and still need to take responsibility for how they affect others, because healing requires awareness, growth requires effort, and love without accountability eventually becomes emotional chaos. The reality is that avoidants are not incapable of connection. Many are capable of deep loyalty, meaningful attachment, and emotional growth when they become self-aware. But growth only happens when someone recognizes their patterns honestly, instead of hiding behind emotional detachment forever. And this applies to everyone, not just avoidants. Every human being carries emotional patterns shaped by their past. Some become clingy because they fear abandonment. Some become distant because they fear vulnerability. Some chase validation. Some run from intimacy. Most people are simply trying to protect themselves from emotional pain in different ways. But protection can become isolation if it controls your entire life. A person cannot experience deep connection while constantly escaping emotional exposure. Real intimacy requires openness. It requires trust. It requires the courage to let another person see the parts of you that feel uncomfortable, uncertain, and human. And for dismissive avoidance, that can feel terrifying, because many spent years building an identity around emotional self-sufficiency. Depending on someone emotionally may feel like weakness to them. Needing reassurance may feel unsafe. Expressing vulnerable emotions may trigger shame internally, so they keep control instead. They keep emotions measured. They keep people at a careful distance. But the human heart was never designed to thrive in emotional isolation forever. Even the people who act like they need nobody still desire connection underneath their defenses. They still want understanding. They still want acceptance. They still want to feel emotionally safe without losing themselves in the process. And that is the tragedy many avoidants silently live with. They crave closeness while fearing it at the same time. They want love while resisting vulnerability. They desire connection while protecting themselves from emotional dependence. And this inner conflict often leaves both people hurting, because one person feels emotionally shut out, while the other feels emotionally overwhelmed. That is why self-awareness changes everything. When someone begins understanding their emotional patterns deeply, healing becomes possible. Defensive reactions stop controlling every relationship. Emotional communication improves. Trust becomes less threatening. Vulnerability becomes more manageable over time. But healing can never be forced through pressure, chasing, or emotional desperation. People change when they become ready to face themselves honestly. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to rescue someone from emotional walls they are not yet willing to lower themselves. Because love cannot heal someone who is committed to emotional avoidance. And at the same time, you should never become emotionally cold simply because someone else struggles with closeness. Your ability to love deeply is not weakness. Your desire for reassurance is not too much. Your emotional needs are not something you should feel guilty for having. Human beings are designed for emotional connection, for warmth, for trust, for consistency, for mutual effort. And the healthiest relationships are built when both people feel emotionally safe enough to be fully honest with each other. Not perfect, not emotionless, just honest. That honesty is what creates emotional security. It allows people to stop performing strength and finally experience real connection without fear controlling every interaction. And maybe that is the deeper lesson hidden inside all of this. Sometimes the people who seem the strongest emotionally are actually carrying the deepest fear of being hurt. Sometimes emotional distance is not confidence, it is protection. Sometimes silence is not lack of feeling, it is fear of exposure. And sometimes the people who struggle most to express love are the same people who never learned what emotionally safe love truly looked like growing up. But no matter how deeply you understand another person's emotional wounds, never forget this truth. You deserve love that does not constantly leave you questioning your worth. You deserve emotional consistency. You deserve peace inside your relationships, not endless confusion. And the right connection will never make you feel like you must abandon yourself just to keep someone emotionally close.